They were, arguably, the greatest group of players ever to pull on the dark blue jersey.
They believed in themselves and had a great belief in each other.
It's there! Scotland scores!
In 1974, they stood on the edge of greatness.
All we needed to do was win one game and we were through.
But their self-destruct button was always close at hand.
By the way, they were all babied at that time.
You can keep your chicken and mouth to yourself.
Some journalists believe that they should have been sent home, albeit Bremner was the captain.
That summer, Scotland went hunting for the Leopards of Zaire.
2-0, clean sheet, wrapped it up, that was it. Nobody complained.
Then Brutes in yellow jerseys arrived, disguised as world champions.
And that was another utterly cynical and disgraceful foul.
Their tactics were brutal, not like you expect from a Brazilian side.
Now, 4 decades on, find out how a murderous African dictator finally shattered the dreams of a nation.
We were cheated out of the 1974 Cup by Zaire.
In the summer of 1974, the nation was in ferment, as for the first time in 16 years, Scotland were at the World Cup finals in West Germany. At last, Scotland had a team fit to grace the biggest sporting event in the world. But the players weren't the only Scots determined to make a splash at this World Cup.
It was the City of Glasgow Police Pipe Band who were encased in this giant ball. Unfortunately, they had looked in the German lager rather well before the event and had been forced to relieve themselves inside the ball. So to the horror of the organisers, when the Scotland ball opened, the City of Glasgow Police Pipe Band proudly splashed out.
Long before the Glasgow Police introduced the rest of the world to the finer points of Scottish culture, the nation had had to endure a long, controversial and sometimes painful passage to the promised land of the World Cup. Scotland's journey to West Germany began in 1972 under the charismatic leadership of former Chelsea manager Tommy Docherty.
Sharp-talking, smart, streetwise, the kind of lovable rogue thing.
He was a mercurial figure, highly individual, not egotistical, but he wanted to go his own way.
The nation's prayer was that his way would be all the way to the World Cup finals in West Germany. When the draw for the qualifying round was made, Scotland found themselves in a 3-team group.
I think everybody looked on it as that we were second favourites. Denmark at the time weren't a European force, but Czechoslovakia were.
In such a small group, one mistake could prove fatal. So in October 1972, Docherty's team headed for Copenhagen, knowing that nothing short of victory would do.
Harper, what a good ball. That's it, Harper. Well, what a start to Tommy Docherty's World Cup campaign. And the trip, well worthwhile.
We had a great squad, we had some very, very good players, and we played superb on the night, and we gave them a bit of a hammering.
I think when you have a 3-team section as it was in those days, you just can't slip up. Those games looked upon as a necessity to collect points.
In the return match at Hampden a month later, a comfortable 2-0 victory put Scotland top of their qualifying group. But just before Christmas 1972, after just 15 months in charge, Docherty announced he was quitting Scotland for Manchester United.
It was astonishing. The Doc had come to us professing undying love for Scotland and the job of his life, but one learns to know Tommy. And it seems that Man U came along and that love for Scotland kind of disappeared overnight, I'm afraid.
Is it conceivable that you could be the Manchester United manager and continue as on a part-time basis as the Scotland boss?
No idea.
Do you want it to be done quickly?
I'd like to say.
We possibly see developments over the weekend.
I'd like to say, Alan. You're struggling for questions now, aren't you?
The big wigs at the SFA weren't laughing. They needed to find a manager quickly. In a move that surprised everyone, they turned to the St Johnstone manager, Willie Ormond.
In terms of the public's perception, he wasn't the equal of Tommy Docherty in terms of his stature within the game.
He was a great wee guy. It was very difficult not to like Willie Ormond. He was perky, good company, liked to laugh, liked to drink. Everybody liked Willie.
What sort of man are you? Are you a disciplinarian?
Well, I wouldn't like to say I'm a hard man, but I would like to say I'm fair. And I expect the players to be fair with me. I'll treat them as men, and I expect the same respect back from them.
He got on well with the press. He enjoyed having drinks with them. He always referred to it as a wet, rather euphemistically.
Docherty had left Ormond a squad full of what could be described rather euphemistically as strong characters. The new boss would have his work cut out imposing himself on these players, as well as convincing a sceptical public that he was the right man for the job. His first chance to impress came when Scotland welcomed England to Hampden on a freezing cold night in February 1973.
Such damage there for Scotland, and Clark getting in on this one. And there it is, number 5, Alan Clark. And the humiliation of Scotland is now complete. England's best victory at Hampden Park this century, and the best since 1888.
As far as I'm concerned, they were all on trial, and I would say that there's 2 or 3 of the players played on last night. I would say their careers are in jeopardy.
A worse start to a managerial career, well, it just isn't possible. But there was a bit of relief for Ormond thanks to a shock result in Copenhagen. Incredibly, the amateurs of Denmark had held the mighty Czechoslovakia to a 1-1 draw. That result put Scotland clear at the top of their World Cup qualification group.
So that when they came to play the game at Hampden, it was a game that if Scotland was to win, they would qualify for the World Cup.
For what was arguably the biggest game in Scottish history, the manager would pick his team. From the 11 that started against England a few months earlier, only Billy Bremner, David Hay, Kenny Dalglish and Willie Morgan would survive. And among a raft of changes, the manager recruited a little-known winger from Coventry City.
Willie Ormond's greatest strength was his judgment of a player. He was a terrific judge of a player. And Willie, out of the blue, brought Tommy Hutchinson into the fold. And nobody had really heard of him.
I'm thinking, well, I'd been in the squad, but you never think that you're going to make your debut in a game as crucial as that one was. But it was to be.
The stakes could not have been higher. The expectation of the nation could not have been greater. The training could not have been more basic.
The build-up to the game was obviously quite tense in many ways. We trained on the Wednesday morning. We finished our training session and the shout was, last in the van. So all starts and wee Billy Bremner goes, whoa. Just need to do set pieces. Right enough, Billy. Need to do set pieces. So we got brought back out the van. Big Jim Holton, first corner came in and they always went to a near post. And Big Jim Holton, he puts his head on it. And wee Willie went, right lads, last in the van. So that was our build up to the night.
Blissfully unaware of the lack of preparation, the Scottish public sensed history in the making, and demand for tickets stretched the SFA's resources to the limit.
There would be tens of thousands of people queuing up at Hampden in the morning when we arrived, with the crocodile queues of people snaked up and down for that kind of big match.
The run-up to the Czechoslovakia game was probably one of the most exciting moments in the history of being a Scottish football fan. The trains, which were then the old football specials, were put on from cities all over Scotland, and people were coming in droves. I remember coming down on the train from Perth, and it was just packed, jam-packed full of people that were desperate to get to the south side of Glasgow to get to this game.
The team knew the expectation of the country. All we needed to do was win one game, and we were through.
When I went in the dressing room, I looked at the number 11 shirt, and it took me a long time before I picked it off the hook and put it on.
I can't remember the dressing room. It was just a blur. The pressure was really quite immense. I've never known anything like it since or before.
The vital break so far hasn't come Scotland's way.
Well, everything was going perfectly well.
There's a shot and it's a good one. And it's a goal! And that's disaster. Absolute disaster for Scotland.
I don't know if the occasion got to me that I didn't concentrate on it, but nevertheless, that was us one down, and the place just went silent.
I think stunned would be the word.
I remember abject disappointment, like the groans I can hear around me even now.
I felt sick. I really did feel sick.
Big Jim Holton going down into the box. Over it comes. Holton's there and it's there! Holton scores!
Perhaps the training ground corner routine was a stroke of genius after all. Scotland then laid siege to the Czechoslovakian goal and created chance after chance.
Bremner trying to make room. Hits the post! Bremner hits the post! Unbelievable misfortune for Scotland.
It was going to come. You know, there was a goal for me. It was going to come.
With just 15 minutes left.
Morgan flicking across. Jordan is there! Jordan scores!
Joe Jordan's my hero. He always will be my hero for getting me out of hole.
Magnificent Scotland! Magnificent!
When Scotland scored, you weren't sure that you had control over your own feet, over your own body, certainly not over the carry-out that you lay between your feet, and sometimes masses of people were almost shifting and shaping and lifting up and all the rest of it. It was amazing. Probably madly unhealthy, almost certainly unsafe, and definitely the most primal emotional experience you'll ever have in your life.
And that's it! That is it! Congratulations, Scotland. Well done, boys.
The final whistle was just electric, pandemonium.
The noise, it's deafening. Deafening to an extent that it's unreal.
The team got a fantastic ovation for the crowd.
Amid all the celebrations, the captain made time to acknowledge the man behind the success.
I thought about the boss, Willie Orman, and I thought, well, I think he deserves to share in the glory that the boys have got. So our first reaction was to go and bring him out the tunnel, because I felt that he did as much as anybody towards getting Scotland through.
But for one player, it was to be the end of the road.
Never played for Scotland again after that.
Poor old Ali. What he missed out on was a procession of scantily clad, beautiful girls with large, inflatable baskets. Yes, after years in the wilderness, Scotland were moving up to the big boys' playground, the World Cup finals in West Germany. In 1974, Scotland was all about the football. Willie Orman's men were off to the World Cup, and the nation was euphoric. And as if to emphasise the point, just weeks after that dramatic night at Hampden, the eyes of the world were once again turned on the south side of Glasgow, when Margot MacDonald came from nowhere to win the Govan by-election for the Scottish National Party.
Along comes Margot with this fantastic look that she had. It was almost kind of felt like Jane Mansfield or Bridget Bardot or somebody was standing for the SNP. It was very bizarre. And of course then Scotland are on a wee bit of a roll with the football, so you'd be mad not to want to put the two and two together, wouldn't you? And I think in lots of ways she became a figure of belief, a figure maybe of Scottish self-confidence.
In the early months of 1974, Scottish self-confidence could not have been higher. Scotland was one of just 16 teams in the draw for the World Cup finals. Bring on the world was the cry. So they did. World champions Brazil, along with Yugoslavia, and the complete unknowns. But optimism and self-belief were the order of the day, and this group of players feared no one.
We genuinely thought as a group of players that we had a serious chance of doing really well in the competition.
Well, I think our chances are very good indeed. I think that we are every bit as good as Yugoslavia, and I think we've every bit as good a chance, if not better, than Brazil.
But deep down, the nation was praying that they wouldn't fall flat on their face, particularly against the minnows from Zaire.
Willie Orman went to watch Zaire playing in Egypt, and he had one or two pressmen with him, and they stayed for about 15 minutes, after which Willie turned and said, "This team can't play. Come on, we'll go back to the hotel for a wee wet, which was his way of saying for a wee half or two.
What Ormond missed while entertaining the gentlemen of the press with a wee wet was Zaire becoming African nations champions when they defeated Zambia in the final in Cairo. Not only was Scotland facing the best team on the continent, but a team that also saw themselves as representing all of black Africa on the world stage. This Pan-African approach was encouraged by Zaire's president, the despotic Joseph Désiré Mobutu. The former army general turned dictator saw in his football team the perfect opportunity to strike a blow for all of Africa at the very heart of the colonial oppressor. Mobutu had rewarded his players with money, cars, and foreign holidays. All they had to do in return was not let Zaire, or more importantly, President Mobutu, down when they got to West Germany. While Mobutu showered fast cars and foreign holidays on his players, the SFA took the Scotland squad to a bed and breakfast in Largs to prepare for the home international championships. A disappointing 1-0 defeat to Northern Ireland was followed by a victory over Wales 3 days later.
Jordan trying to get under it. Across the box, Ford is up, and that's Dalglish! Dalglish scores it!
With the visit of England to Hampden looming, the victory over Wales was a huge relief to the team. So on their return to Largs, a small celebration was arranged, which turned into a large celebration that finally ended as dawn broke over the Firth of Clyde. Perfect conditions for a boat trip.
We were just walking along the seafront, all the players, and wee Jimmy was jumping about, being what wee Jimmy is, and he got in a boat. So as all the boats were along the seafront, so it was just a wee rowing boat. So I just gave it a wee kick with the foot.
You shoved me off, kicked me off. I thought, I'm all right, I've got the oars, but there wasn't any rocks, and I've done it again. I can't even believe this. She's at it. Hey. Are you getting me back in again?
I can remember seeing Jimmy on the boat, just at the edge. Walked into the hotel, looked out the window of the hotel, and by the time I had walked across and climbed the stairs, looked out the window of the hotel, he was a wee dot on the horizon.
As Johnston drifted further out to sea, his panic-stricken teammates finally called the Coast Guard.
Of course, this story, albeit at 5 o'clock in the morning, leaked out to the press, and we all reported to the Scottish team hotel.
Next morning, the papers were full of it.
Obviously, the players weren't very happy at the publicity it got, none more so than wee Jimmy.
By the way, everybody in that team could have ended up in that rowing boat because they were all bevied at that time. If Jimmy was the front end of the pantomime horse, the rest of the team could have been in the rear end.
In a strange way, it galvanised you. You know what I mean? It made you resolve all the greater to do well in that.
Angered at what they saw as an overreaction by the press to their early morning activities, the team closed ranks. The only talking they'd do now was on the park. On Saturday, May 18th, 1974, England's 3 Lions arrived at Hampden, wounded, snarling, and with a point to prove. The nation that just 8 years earlier had been crowned champions of the world hadn't even made it to the last 16 in 1974, and were out to show their upstart northern neighbours that they were still the real football power on these islands. And after events of the previous week, even the normally patriotic Scottish press corps in their perch high above Hampden had all but written off Scotland's chances.
Worthington up towards the halfway line. Chance here for Scotland. Jordan. And it's a goal! A deflection, but Scotland have scored.
Johnston. But the Scotland players, particularly the much maligned Jimmy Johnston, had something to prove.
Jimmy Johnston.
I vividly recall the difference in the attitudes of the players. The English were mechanical, we had that touch of spirit and verve where Johnson was outstanding.
Scotland have possession on the right. Dalglish out in front. And the ball's in the net! And that's a crazy goal!
And Scotland have won it!
Having been singled out for the majority of the criticism, Johnston, on behalf of his teammates, had a message for the gentleman in the Hampden press box.
As he walked off at the end of the England game, turned and made, shall we say, an unmistakable gesture, which nobody in the press box could possibly have mistaken what he was saying.
I guess they saw the victory as a sort of getting their win back in the press, maybe, but Jimmy did make a gesture to the press box.
Willie, what was the most satisfying factor about this victory this afternoon?
Well, first of all, the most satisfying thing is, as far as I was concerned, we shut a few mouths. It's up the top there. It's sit up there and do all the criticising before a match. We ruled us out of the game completely. This is the main factor. We've had a bit of slating this week, the players and myself. We had no chance this morning. I only hope that my advice to them is to read the morning editions, and we'll start from there. Now we'll start talking about the game.
Scotland were heading to the World Cup as newly crowned British champions, and by the time the squad and the media met up at Glasgow Airport for the flight to West Germany, an uneasy peace had broken out between the two camps. But rather than flying straight to their base at Frankfurt, the SFA had arranged 2 warm-up matches against Belgium and Norway.
And that's where real trouble developed.
As we left Glasgow Airport, I always can remember we each had a bottle of champagne. That was everybody, from the front of the plane where the players and officials were, right through to the end. Well, we weren't playing football for Scotland.
Seemingly having learned nothing from the shenanigans the week before at Largs, the players consumed alcohol like a football journalist, actually. And it showed in the performance against Belgium.
Up comes the goalkeeper, good chip, and there it is. Number 1 for Belgium, 23 minutes, leaving Harvey stranded there.
We actually lost to Belgium the Saturday night, and it was a very poor performance because Belgium weren't all that good.
Some of the Scottish players looked as if they simply weren't fit, and because I think they hadn't prepared properly. They had been enjoying themselves.
I can recall the Belgian coach saying after that Scotland played like blind men in the midfield.
Oh, well, great shot. David Harvey, no chance at all.
And then the following day we flew to Oslo, where the real fun began.
We stayed in a university campus, but it wasn't the best place for preparation, and I think we had 1 or 2 drinks too many, which happened in those days.
Some of us were in that beer bar in mid-evening, and when suddenly 2 little red-haired figures appeared through the door, Messrs Bremner and Johnson, obviously for a night out.
John Watson was sitting beside me when in came Billy Bremner and Jimmy Johnson. Unca Fu, I think you could put it, singing at the tops of their voices, came and sat in front of us. John Watson had never been so close to 2 Scottish drunks in his life, and he felt as if I thought he had a sighting of the Loch Ness Monster.
Another breach of discipline involving senior players and alcohol was too much for some of the press, and the peace treaty agreed after the England game was torn up.
There was a great deal of speculation that the players might be sent home, and some journalists believed that they should have been sent home, albeit Bremner was the captain.
Hugh Taylor described the trip to Belgium and Oslo as the Tour de Farce.
With just days to go before the start of the World Cup, the relationship between the squad and the press was again back at square one.
Any hangovers this morning, Mr. Roman?
You can keep your trick of the match to yourself. Just remember what you're saying.
There is one particular reason why nothing came good of that. Because of what had happened at Largs, and despite his brilliant performance against England, and then what happened in Oslo, in particular, with that incident where these 2 players were almost sent home, I think that Willie Ormond put the blame firmly on Jimmy Johnson's shoulders. This was our preparation for the World Cup.
Despite all the controversy and their poor preparation, Scotland went on to beat Norway 2-1 in their last warm-up game before the World Cup. This was Scotland's first away victory in 7 matches. Was this the form or behaviour of potential World Cup winners? In June 1974, a bleary-eyed Scotland squad touched down in West Germany and into a security frenzy the like of which none of them had ever experienced before. These finals were just 2 years after the massacre of the Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympic Games. The German authorities were determined that there was going to be no repeat at the World Cup.
There were obviously genuine fears because the minute we got there, the German security people were all over the place.
It was like playing the World Cup in a war zone. If you looked at the security preparations and activity around the team.
If you went to the toilet, a security guy had to go with you.
The German police were understandably nervous. The BBC in London, ridiculously so.
Trouble could come from the Arabs, from the German Baader-Meinhof anarchists, and from the invading horde of Scots fans.
Tens of thousands of Scots descended on West Germany for Scotland's first World Cup in 16 years. Prior to 1974, Scotland fans had been just a bunch of guys in tartan bonnets. But at this World Cup, there was a sense that they were becoming an organised, if boisterous, but very welcome addition to the cause of the national team.
Going to Frankfurt and Dortmund was just such a journey, and everything was being done on the cheap. We stayed on campsites in the outside of the city, and the Tammy and the Old Lion Rampants and whatever. And I remember we met up with a whole crowd of Hearts fans, and so St Johnstone and Hearts fans, and we ended up having to share this kind of chalet thing. So it was that kind of sense that you were on the journey of your life.
Very few of those fans would have been lucky enough to secure a ticket for the lavish opening ceremony in Frankfurt, the one at which the Glasgow Police Pipe Band had performed. This was the curtain raiser for the opening match of the 1974 World Cup between Scotland's Group 2 opponents Brazil and Yugoslavia.
We were hoping Brazil would beat Yugoslavia or vice versa. They had drawn with each other, so we then had to beat one of them because we knew they'd both beat Zaire.
The goalless draw wasn't ideal for Scotland, but at least they knew that victory over Zaire would put them top of their group. But being overwhelming favourites doesn't sit well with Scotland.
Scotland sometimes are noted for not doing well against sort of so-called weaker opposition.
The Zaire game was difficult because there was so much tension before the game. It was unreal.
What was unreal for those watching was that after 26 minutes, this match was goalless, and that Zaire had come closest to scoring.
Gets another one, hits the post. Takoko was in there. Andrews comes back to help his defence out, which is under a lot of pressure at the moment. Jordan up. It comes for Lorimer. What a goal! That is the way to tap him away. Peter Lorimer.
The goal was absolutely a great relief to everybody because, you need that goal just to settle things down.
Another equally welcome, if less spectacular goal arrived 8 minutes later.
That's a goal! It's given! Jordan has scored it!
We were 2-0 up at half-time, and I genuinely think we put the foot off the gas subconsciously, knowing we were playing Brazil 4 or 5 days later.
Again, slows it down, Billy Bremner. And the crowd giving Scotland the bird. And certainly in this second half, Scotland have not shown the urgency. There's Dennis Law coming over to Bremner and saying, come on, give us the ball. Let's get on with the game.
We won the game comfortably. 2-0, clean sheet, wrapped it up. That was it. And nobody complained. Professional job done.
No one would disagree with that. But shouldn't Scotland have been more adventurous against a team unlikely to take a point from any of their remaining games? In the second round of matches in Group 2, Zaire would take on Yugoslavia at the same time as Scotland would go head-to-head with World Cup holders Brazil. Befitting their status as the reigning world champions, the Brazilians had been besieged by broadcasters and teenage autograph hunters since their arrival in West Germany. Their match against Scotland may not have been regarded as a particularly glamorous fixture down in Rio, but this was the game every Scot had been waiting for.
There are some 20,000 Scotsmen piled in here tonight to support these lions, these rampant lions of Scotland, and they've got to be rampant tonight.
You associate Brazil with glory and the beautiful game of the World Cup, so to play in the World Cup against Brazil doesn't come much better than that.
They had some great players, Jairzinho, Cesar, Rivellino, but to be honest, we were a very good team.
There was no fear. There was absolutely no fear. That group of players believed in themselves and had a great belief in each other individually and as a unit.
We gave them our respect, but what we did is we got wired in.
The Brazil team of 1974 were unrecognisable to that of 4 years earlier. The beautiful football that had won their third World Cup in Mexico City had been left behind in South America.
Lorimer, but he's got to go alone, and that was another utterly cynical and disgraceful foul by Luis Pereira.
The Brazilians had decided to become European. They put in tough guys.
Both teams looking slightly apprehensive at this moment, and there's Willie Morgan getting his first cracks of it.
They started to say to themselves, the only way we can survive in a World Cup in Europe is to be European, to be tougher.
Danny Delbridge absolutely sprawled by Piazza.
Brazil's got a wee bit of a history of kicking Scotland off the park, you know, so I'm not a big believer in all this samba football stuff. I think there's a cynical side to Brazil that actually came out in that tournament.
David Hay. Oh, and that was a solid work from Luis Pereira.
I think sometimes Scottish football fans can delude themselves that they're engaged in some kind of samba dance with Brazil. They kicked us off the park and I actually don't like them.
Kenny Dalglish runs at them. Luis Pereira's leg pounding from behind and brings him down again.
Their tactics were brutal and not like you expect from a Brazilian side.
Peter Lorimer. He goes now. And he whacked it. Oh, what a screamer that was. Sorry, David Hay.
Having come to terms with their opponent's tactics, Scotland dominated the match and had far the better chances.
Jordan is up there. Got in. And it was just past. Little Billy Bremner so desperately close then to getting the goal.
Under normal circumstances, a draw against the world champions would have been cause for celebration.
For the angle, and the final whistle has gone.
The reaction to the Brazil game was really disappointment, because everybody felt that we could have achieved the greatest result in Scottish football history by beating them.
And a certain amount of a really good spirit amongst the players down there at the moment.
I think we were unlucky not to get the victory, but we thought, no, a draw is not the worst result. Well, we can still qualify if we beat Yugoslavia.
You just came off nothing each against Brazil, and the next one was what was the score with Zaire and Yugoslavia.
The answer was a source of even greater disappointment than the draw with Brazil. Yugoslavia had absolutely hammered Zaire.
And that's now 9-0.
There was no way that Zaire were 9-0 worse off than any team in that. And I just think could have been a conspiracy somewhere that result was tied up 9-0.
Since 1974, the popular belief has been that Zaire's Yugoslav coach told his players to take a dive to help his own country qualify. The truth is in fact more sinister. Following their opening match, the Zaire players and their FA fell out over unpaid wages, bonuses and expenses. The players had threatened to boycott the match against Yugoslavia, but did reluctantly fulfill the fixture, albeit in a rather half-hearted manner. But in all the kerfuffle, they seem to forget all about their beloved president's warning not to bring disgrace on the nation. Back in Zaire, Mobutu was incandescent, and his presidential guards were dispatched to the team hotel to convey his displeasure to the players. According to fullback Luanga Mwepo, the president's henchmen delivered an ultimatum to the squad. If they lost by more than 3 goals against Brazil in their last match of the tournament, they would never again see their families back in Zaire. The only winners in this horrible situation were Yugoslavia. With the group now totally skewed in their favour, they only required a draw in the final match against Scotland to qualify for the quarter-finals.
But my journey has an element of farce.
In 1974, a young comedian burst onto the national stage.
You'd hear him with no up-to-minute. Oh!
Billy Connolly had the country in hysterics with the release of his solo concert album. Like a bearded and more sweary version of Vida Lynn, Connolly was dispatched to Germany to entertain the troops preparing for the most important battle of their lives. And the team was in need of cheering up, as on the eve of their must-win match against Yugoslavia, news broke of a terrorist threat.
The police at the team hotel got a message to say that there was a death threat being posed by the IRA.
The death threat was to me and Willie Ormond, so the security was hugely increased.
He just made sure you didn't sit beside Sandy Jardine, you know.
Although Jardine and Ormond were named in the threat, no one was taking any chances.
I can remember little Jimmy going out with his bag. He says, I play for Celtic. so don't shoot me, I'm playing for Celtic.
Security reached a peak when the team coach headed to Frankfurt for the crucial match against Yugoslavia.
They had us going through all the drills, what we must do, lie in the aisle and just don't move and let them handle it. There was a helicopter which was full of troops, which gave us an escort along the route.
A helicopter was probably the only mode of transport that the Scotland fans didn't use to get to Frankfurt that day. The thousands of Scots already encamped in and around the city received substantial reinforcements, and thousands more foot soldiers arrived with high expectations in time for the crucial game. This huge influx of Scotland fans wasn't made particularly welcome by the large Yugoslav communities who'd been rebuilding industrial Germany since the end of the Second World War.
Some of the nightclubs around there's quite a lot of tension between the visiting Scotland fans and these Yugoslavian workers. And actually on the day of the Yugoslavian game, of the tens of thousands of Scotland fans that were there, many will remember bottles raining down on them, cans and beer coming in from the Yugoslavian crowd and all the rest of it. There's quite a lot of tension and the outbreak of violence around the ground as well. It wasn't the most pleasant experience.
On the day of the most important match in Scottish football history, with the team's preparation already disrupted by a terrorist threat, and with the support under attack from Yugoslav fans, once inside the stadium, they had to put up with this.
God Save the Queen had been roundly booed at Hampden for years.
I would have preferred Scotland to Bravery and the bagpipes and that's what Scotland's all about.
It'd been great to have Flower of Scotland, but it was just one of these things. The tune played, you just stood to attention, and on you go.
Everyone, no matter what sort of your feelings might be about royalty or whatever, or nationalism, everyone in Scotland was happy to move away from a situation where the tune that we played as our national anthem was booed.
At kick-off on June 22nd, 1974, on a sweltering afternoon in Frankfurt, Scotland were just one victory away from the World Cup quarter-finals. A score draw would also see them through, but only if a terrified Zaire team could restrict Brazil to less than a 3-0 victory in their match. After a difficult build-up to the match, Scotland's start was perfect. Almost.
We had one or two chances, and I thought again we were the better team. I thought we again took the game to the opposition and made the better chances and were the better team.
And there's John! One of the few times he's missed the ball and he's escaped the marker. And there's trouble in the crowd. Police coming out.
In the other Group 2 match, there was a goal after just 12 minutes.
And there's the first goal, put in by Jorginho.
Their worst fear about a Zairean collapse seemed to be coming true. Scotland had to go for victory.
Long and deep. Bremner.
Scotland continued to dominate the match, and with 65 minutes gone, Brazil still hadn't increased their lead. Things were looking good. Then,
Jairzinho for Rivellino. Crash. That's more like it since Zagallo.
as it stood, Brazil required just one more goal to progress at the expense of Scotland. The Scots' quest for a goal became a little more frantic.
Up the line by Bullion.
We had 4 or 5 what you'd call reasonably good chances to score.
Zaire have read those well.
Then came the news that Scotland had dreaded.
That was better, and it's a goal. Terrible mistake by Kazadi, and a goal.
Scotland now needed to beat Yugoslavia to have any chance of qualifying. But with just 8 minutes to go, it was the Yugoslavs who struck a mortal blow to Scotland's World Cup hopes.
Putting it across, headed in, and it's a goal. Yugoslavia are 1-up, and Scotland are just about out the World Cup.
The Scots had to score twice in the last 8 minutes to stay in the tournament.
And a moment died with the ball.
Their search for that elusive goal became increasingly desperate. But perhaps not as desperate as Zaire's desire not to lose another to Brazil.
Now that's a booking. That must be a booking by Moeto.
This comic moment, scoffed at by millions since 1974, doesn't seem quite so funny when you consider that Luengo Mwepu's actions were those of a terrified man doing anything to waste time to prevent Brazil scoring a 4th goal, and the consequences that would mean for the team and their families at the hands of Mobutu's henchmen. Back in Frankfurt, Joe Jordan's goal in the dying minutes gave Scotland a glimmer of hope.
And it's a goal! Jordan scores for Scotland. Brave, brave Scotland.
When it gets down to the last 2 minutes, you're just clutching at straws, really.
Warming the bench as he had been for the whole of the tournament was Jimmy Johnston, the one man many thought could unlock this disciplined Yugoslav defence.
Meanwhile, Morgan for Scotland.
But memories of Largs, Hampden and Oslo outweighed any other consideration.
Ormond was influenced both by the media furore, the attitude of the Blazerati of the SFA, and as a consequence, Jimmy Johnson didn't kick a ball during the World Cup. But he made a mistake in that regard.
Scotland must get a goal, and they're playing injury time. And it's gone. Scotland go out of the World Cup.
It was just bitter disappointment, absolute gutted, really.
A huge disappointment. We didn't do enough because we didn't score enough goals. But I don't think there was a bad performance in the 3 games.
You always smile, buddy. Billy Bremner waving to the Scottish supporters.
No one could deny that Lady Luck abandoned Scotland. In that first game, Zaire were at full strength and were not a team taking industrial action. Neither had Scotland the advantage the Brazilians enjoyed of knowing how many goals they needed to score against Zaire to progress. But Scotland's wounds were largely self-inflicted, and it was their decision to defend their lead in that opening game against Zaire that ultimately cost Scotland a place in the quarter-finals.
I'm not saying we would have won the World Cup by any means, but as a group of players who were starting to grow into the tournament, and to think you got beat by 1 goal, it was a wee bit of sickener, to be honest.
I think there was pride in your performance. Okay, you want to do better, and I think it's a bit unfair sometimes. You can say glorious failure from a Scottish point of view, but I think it was greater than that.
It was heartbreaking to come away undefeated with a good team that everyone thought could have progressed further than it did.
Scotland would never again come this close to qualifying for the later stages, despite 5 subsequent attempts. West Germany was the last World Cup finals for Denis Law, Jimmy Johnston, Peter Lorimer, Tommy Hutchinson and captain Billy Bremner, whose Scotland career ended in disgrace the following year after yet another alcohol-fuelled incident in a Copenhagen nightclub. Back in 1974, the disappointed players headed home, undefeated but out. The scenes that greeted their arrival at Glasgow Airport were unexpected, to say the least.
Yeah, that was a bit special. Something I didn't expect, to be honest. A bit of a shock, but nice.
We just couldn't believe the amount of people and how we were treated when we got back. It was amazing. That's something I'll never forget.
We're a football nation, and through our football, I think we lifted the nation that year, and they lifted us on that day. It was great.
We did something in Germany that other teams didn't do. We went forward and we played football and we tried to score goals, and this is most of the other teams, they defended. We did our best, we went forward, and this is my idea of football.
Well, Willie, from all of Scotland, welcome home and congratulations.
Question, was it well deserved? Possibly on balance, no. I'd like to say yes, because I believed in that team. I thought there were great players in that team. I thought we had a very, very good squad. But it was also a squad that on balance, in the end, just slightly underperformed. So on balance, yeah, probably welcome them back because we're Scotland fans, but was it deserved? No.